Good government, two words with 5,000 years of history. Two words that have inspired great minds, great leaders, and great empires to grapple with questions the world is still asking today. What is good government? How is it built, and how is it sustained? Governments today have many important responsibilities. What can governments do to effectively address these responsibilities? We have examined the data to shed new light on these questions.
Governance is critical for a nation's success. Good governance helps nations to flourish, helps nations to be prosperous. We recognize that government systems around the world are very diverse and varied. And so in our index, we took care to focus on capabilities that matter to all governments.
The Chandler Good Government Index has been more than 2 years in the making. We've consulted with government practitioners, leaders, index experts, and researchers to get a full and comprehensive understanding of the nature of good government. The Chandler Good Government Index ranks 104 countries from across the world, which account for nearly 90% of the world's population. It is the most comprehensive index measuring government capabilities and outcomes in the world.
The index has been reviewed and the data distilled into 35 indicators, which are grouped into 7 distinct pillars.
The index has been designed by government practitioners for government practitioners. So it really drills down into what are those core capabilities that governments need.
The Chandler Good Government Index focuses on the capabilities that governments need to succeed, rather than the outcomes of good government. We also want to use the index to tell stories, to celebrate the experiences and the achievements of good leaders and nations around the world.
The Chandler Good Government Index is now a powerful tool in the hands of government practitioners and leaders. Leaders in government are now empowered because they can use the index as a tool to identify, measure, and address the capabilities that matter.
The index offers data-driven, nonpartisan insights to help governments benchmark their capabilities and performance. One that can spark honest, practical discussions about ways to improve. One that draws upon more than 50 data points from across more than 100 countries to help shed new light on two words. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the 2022 launch of the Chandler Good Government Index. My name is Yvonne Sean, and I'll be your host and moderator for today. If you joined us for the global launch of the index last year, welcome back. For those of you joining us for the first time, happy to have you here with us this year. We know it might be very early in the morning or rather late at night for some of you, so thank you for making the time to be with us. The Chandler Good Government Index is designed by the Chandler Institute of Governance, or CIG. CIG is an international nonprofit organization located here in Singapore that supports governments around the world in building capabilities, skills, and leadership. Following last year's inaugural launch, the index was reported in over 114 print and online articles and published in 8 languages across 19 countries. Over the past year, CIG has engaged with governments in multiple countries to share insights from the index and held various dialogues and exchanges with government agencies who wish to use the CGGI as a tool to benchmark their performance. We have also worked hard to refine the methodology of the index. We continue to be guided by our firm belief that capabilities matter, especially in the face of an increasingly turbulent world with global crises such as the COVID-19 pandemic, armed conflict, and climate disasters. The 2022 CGGI reinforces our belief that governments with strong capabilities will be better able to secure positive outcomes for its people. We're very excited to share the latest results and new insights we've garnered from this year's index, and we look forward to hearing from our distinguished panel of government practitioners and experts a little later, as they share their ideas and thoughts on rethinking government resilience. I would like to invite Mr. Wu Wei-Neng, the Executive Director of the Chandler Institute of Governance, and some members of the Index team to tell us more about the CGGI and, of course, share the 2022 results and rankings.
Welcome to the global launch of the 2022 Chandler Good Government Index. The Chandler Good Government Index began with the simple big idea that governance matters, and this year showed us it matters more than ever. We firmly believe that if governments can better understand, measure, and benchmark their capabilities and performance, they will be better placed to work with citizens, businesses, and the international community to build a better, more sustainable, more peaceful world. Talent and capital flow to countries that are well-governed, supporting even greater trust and prosperity. Nations that do well in this race are well poised to excel in the governance competition. The Chandler Good Government Index measures government capabilities and outcomes across 104 countries, or roughly 90% of the world's population. It is a composite index, drawing on both survey and metric-based data to construct 35 indicators that together represent good government. Our goal is to offer a principled, non-ideological and data-driven way to understand government capabilities and outcomes around the world. The index framework, pillars, and indicators are distilled from 2 years of interviews and consultations with government leaders, practitioners, and experts across 5 continents. It represents a collective perspective from the government practitioner community on what good government is. The index focuses mainly on capabilities because all governments, regardless of political ideology, can agree that the ability to develop plans, anticipate the future, combat corruption, budget, communicate effectively, and analyze data are key to their success. We also measure important outcomes like health, education, and environmental protection, because ultimately, effective capabilities must translate into good outcomes. Good governance capabilities are so important because they are an enduring source of competitive advantage for nations. Capabilities like data analysis, communication, and negotiating skills, and budgeting take time to improve and build up, but once developed and strengthened, they are not easily eroded in the short term and can support governments through periods of short-term instability or crisis. Another way of putting this is that if we see a nation as a modern aircraft, then the various flight systems are as important as the pilot in ensuring a safe and smooth takeoff, journey, and landing. Too often, we focus on the role of national leadership because charismatic and visionary leaders attract and intrigue us. We sometimes fail to see the silent institutions, systems, and processes working in the background, stabilizing the aircraft, scanning for threats beyond the visible horizon, ensuring passenger comfort, and in the extreme case, overriding dangerous actions by human pilots. The Chandler Good Government Index measures these very capabilities that the flight systems of a nation depend on. These are the top 30 countries in the 2022 Chandler Good Government Index. The full range of country scores and rankings has now gone live on our index website. While there is considerable stability in the rankings compared to 2021, we also see some changes that correspond to the different choices and steps countries are taking and seeing, and outcomes they are experiencing. For instance, the UK joined the top 10 this year, partly due to its effective negotiation of over 60 trade agreements over the last 2 years. This in turn indicates the country's strong diplomatic and administrative capabilities, as well as the useful role trade agreements play as a capability for creating attractive investment and business environments. Meanwhile, the Netherlands fell 1 spot, mainly due to the significant impact of COVID-19 on its ability to attract investments from abroad. As many government practitioners know, the ability to attract and retain investments is a key capability of governance. Beyond the top 20 countries, we see countries with exceptional performance in a range of individual pillars and indicators. This is very encouraging and shows the range and diversity of initiatives to build effective capabilities among governments. Italy shows impressive scores in passport strength and international diplomacy, and in important indicators such as health and the quality of its customs and logistical systems. Costa Rica is ranked 42nd in the index, but displays strong performance in strategic prioritization and regulatory governance. Rwanda is once again the highest scoring low-income country in the index and shows that good government does not depend only on a country's GDP per capita.
While every capability in the CGGI is important, we see three fundamental capabilities that need to be in place to strengthen key national systems and support the development of other capabilities. The rule of law, property rights, and anti-corruption are the three capabilities that are most closely linked with overall index performance. They are cornerstones upon which trust-based societies and economies are built. The CGGI defines the rule of law as whether a country's justice system and laws are just and impartial, whether governments observe due process and are accountable to the laws, and whether justice is accessible to all. Laws are the rules of the game in every country, and only governments can make laws. These laws determine the boundaries of what is possible and the relationships between different groups and individuals in society. Property rights are the extent to which the legal rights to own and use physical and intellectual property are established and protected. Sound and effective property rights systems encourage investment, innovation, and ideas, and provide stability and certainty of tenure, use, and ownership. Secure and recognized property rights also allow people to use their assets as collateral for financing education, housing, and entrepreneurship. Anti-corruption is the control and prevention of the abuse of public power for private benefit. When government officers demonstrate integrity and incorruptibility, they improve their efficiency and performance quality, earning the trust of citizens, businesses, and investors, and creating a fertile environment for national prosperity. Of course, effective governments need more than just these three capabilities. Different situations and challenges require different sets of capabilities. For instance, when facing an international crisis, a country's national brand and its external trade and diplomatic networks may be crucial. When providing adequate public housing for citizens, a government's fiscal position and its coordination and implementation systems may be more relevant. A central tenet of our work at the Chandler Institute of Governance, our projects, training programs, and research initiatives is practicality. Governments aren't always fully in control of final outcomes, but they can always take steps to develop their capabilities and skills. Training is a central pillar of capability building within governments. But public sector training and skill development must be practitioner-oriented rather than abstract or theoretical, and must be contextualized for the day-to-day realities of government. Last year, CIG launched the Chandler Academy of Governance to work closely with governments around the world on practical curriculum development and learning.
In a more turbulent world, it is also worth examining if stronger government capabilities can improve preparedness and resilience in the face of crises. This year's index results includes data that was captured during the global COVID-19 pandemic, which allows us some data-driven insights into how the pandemic has affected government capabilities and outcomes, and vice versa. Without good governance, citizens lose trust in the state to deliver, which undermines the ability of public servants to take decisive and sometimes controversial measures such as quarantines, travel restrictions, and safe distancing measures that prove necessary for recovery efforts in countries around the world. Good governance should not be taken for granted. Even high-performing countries can be caught off guard by unforeseen crises such as pandemics. Looking at the CGGI in relation to COVID-19, we found that good governments indeed are more prepared for crises and tend to handle them better. Countries that scored well in the index tended to be better prepared for the COVID-19 pandemic, conducted more COVID-19 tests per capita, and experienced fewer excess deaths over the last 2 years. However, good governance is not the only factor in determining country outcomes during pandemics. Other factors such as geography, climate, demographics, obesity rates, and culture play a major part too. Sometimes, final outcomes are beyond the control of governments alone, and best efforts do not always guarantee success in the face of complex new challenges. As nations prepare for future pandemics and other natural or man-made disasters, it is worth remembering that core government capabilities can be deployed to manage different types of crises. For instance, the operational and communication capabilities to deal with rapidly spreading viruses may to some extent be useful in dealing with environmental disasters or terrorist attacks.
When dealing with the challenges and crises of the present, it is easy to lose sight of our hopes for the future. If we care about building fair and inclusive societies, where every person has good opportunities to aspire, strive, and succeed, then we also need to care about governance. Good governance is closely linked to social mobility and progress. High-scoring countries in the CGGI almost always do better in providing their citizens with a better quality of life that goes beyond just monetary wealth. One key finding of this year's index rankings is the close relationship between good governance and social mobility. The countries that score highest on CGGI also have the highest levels of social mobility. We found a similarly strong relationship between the CGGI and the Social Progress Index, which looks at 53 indicators to measure how well a society provides its people with the things they really care about. These findings suggest the most capable governments are ones that create equal opportunities and nurture fair and inclusive societies. What this tells us is that good governance is deeply connected to prosperity and opportunity. Countries with better government capabilities also have better governance outcomes. The same countries that top the overall index also do best in delivering outcomes people care about. In this year's index report, our founder Richard Chandler makes a compelling case for the important role of governments in building fairer, more inclusive societies. When nations are well governed, there is a higher level of social equity and equality of opportunities, which leads to fair, high-trust societies. In turn, this increases social mobility and lowers income inequality, resulting in shared prosperity in the longer term. In societies like Denmark, Sweden, Finland, and Norway, shared prosperity is anchored by policies grounded in social equity, such as equal rights and non-discrimination, and equal access to public goods and services. Building a tall social mobility ladder is key to having fairer societies.
The 2022 Chandler Good Government Index is the product of 3 years of extensive discussions, research, design, analysis, and review. The index website hosts useful tools that can be used to filter results, benchmark country performance, and customize indicator weights, as well as track country scores over time. I'm also happy to share the 2022 Index Report, which contains a range of stories and experiences of government practitioners around the world. Even as we seek data-driven analysis, we never forget that good government depends on good people serving their nations. Good government matters, even more so in times of turbulence and crisis. On behalf of the Chandler Institute of Governance, I invite you to join us on our journey of measuring and understanding good government.
Thank you. And we're happy to announce that the 2022 results are now live on the Index website. The CGGI report and executive summary are also now available for viewing or downloading. You can find the links to all of these on the resources page of this launch site. Now, we would like to hear from you. So here's our question. To what extent do you think that countries with good governance managed the COVID-19 pandemic better over the last 2 years? And we have 3 options for you. Definitely, somewhat, no. Other factors were more important than governance. If you have your video open in full screen, please minimize your video first so that you can access the poll tab to submit your response. This poll is now open for your response, and we will share the results after the panel discussion. Welcome back. The challenges posed by COVID-19 have exposed the widening gaps and fault lines of governance globally. Now, as governments take steps to emerge from the pandemic and manage the challenges of growth, sustainability, and rising geopolitical tensions, they must take steps too to build institutional resilience to perform better in the future. This evening, we're very pleased to have a distinguished panel of governance practitioners and experts share their views on what we can do to improve and enhance government resilience. Now, let's welcome to my left, Niranjan Rajadaksha, the CEO and Senior Fellow at the Artha India Research Advisors. And to Niranjan's left, we have Maria Isabel Mejia Jaramillo, the Senior Specialist in Digital Government and Public Innovation Digital Transformation Department, CAF, at the Development Bank of Latin America. Here in studio with me, we have His Excellency Jean de Dieu Uihanganye, the High Commissioner of Rwanda to Singapore, Australia, New Zealand, and Indonesia. And we also have Aaron Maniam, the Deputy Secretary, Industry and International at the Ministry of Communications and Information, Singapore. Rounding up our panel this evening is Kenneth Sim, the Dean of the Chandler Academy of Governance and the Deputy Executive Director at the Chandler Institute of Governance. Welcome, everyone. It is great to have you here today discussing this very timely topic with me. Now, one of the definitions of good governance is the ability to withstand and respond rapidly to natural disasters, deliberate attacks, unconventional stresses. So as an opener now, I would like to get each of you to respond to what you think COVID-19 has shown us about government resilience. Let's start with you first, Niranjan.
Yeah, thank you. So obviously these have been 2 extraordinary years, thanks to first COVID shock and then the war in Europe. I think there's the first important lesson is that government systems are often designed to deal with shocks which emanate from within the system, right? Like a financial crisis in 2008, etc. But I think what this has shown is that shocks can come from outside the system. It could be a virus, it could be a ship which is stuck in the Suez Canal. So I think the idea that shocks only come from within the system, and that's what you need to look out for and prepare for. I think this has shown us that these exogenous shocks are very important. So the way I look at it is, have governments tick 4 boxes, right? One is that in this entire process of responding to these crises, have they learned from their mistakes? Have they adapted to new data as it comes in? Have they well-defined triggers, sort of thresholds which are triggers for policy action? And do they have a sense of what is the new equilibrium after the shock dissipates? And I think it's been a mixed record. We can discuss that later. The other point, just a quick opening point, is that I think we need to distinguish between resilience at the level of government processes, which means that how policy responds to shocks, and resilience at the level of the overall system, that how does policy promote resilience, not just within government, but society as a whole. I think this entire 2-year period has thrown up very difficult challenges on these fronts.
Excellent. Thank you for that opener, Niranjan. Isabel, Maria, can I get your thoughts on this as well, please?
Yes, thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here. I think that a crisis like COVID-19 challenged the resilience of governments. From my perspective as a specialist in digital government and public innovation in Latin America, technology has been a critical factor in overcoming the pandemic. Thanks to the technical capabilities such as hardware, software, databases, and communication infrastructures built over more than 30 years, many government agencies have continued to provide services to citizens, give information to the population, and execute and monitor strategies dealing with the emergency. However, the pandemic shown us the deep inequalities of our countries. Millions of parents, teachers, and children in the most depressed areas of the big cities and rural areas still don't have the tools to connect. The need to close the gap to include vulnerable populations and the most remote regions is evident. This digital gap refers not only to connectivity, infrastructure, but also to the adoption and the use of technology.
Thank you for that, Maria. Ambassador, I also want to get your thoughts on this. What has the COVID-19 pandemic shown you about government resilience?
Oh, well, thank you so much, and it's my pleasure to be here today. I'll say COVID-19 has shown that, first of all, that we are interconnected than what we think. We have government, and government are designed in a way you will go through the risk assessment and so on, and think you can weather anything which comes from within or you anticipate. COVID-19 has shown that all the anticipation and things we do as government or within the government, it kind of necessarily doesn't fit, and you will have to adapt. And in that sense, the capacity of a government to adapt or change or innovate toward a certain crisis, it's been really tested in that sense. In Rwanda, for example, in a country without resources, in a country without not high budget, and you have something like COVID-19, access to vaccine is a problem, public health care, but how can you easily transform the resources and move one resources and technology towards something like that? That's a test. That's something which the government which COVID-19 has shown us in terms of our resilience system. That's one thing I would say. But maybe the second one, which is very important, is the trust the people have in the governance. Specifically, if you're dealing with some countries which are still poor, and you're having a lot of people living just by what they gain that day, and telling them you're going to lock down the country, the whole country, and for them to be able to listen to that and trust you and go in their house knowing that they're not going to get something to eat, even if you have programs to give them what to eat. That's very important. That shows that you've been able to build the trust all around, even if you do it not necessarily for the resilience, but that plays a key role in terms of government resilience and the way you plan the resilience of a nation. So the trust that people have in their leadership. And contrary to that, you've seen other countries which do struggle to impose key public health. These are scientific measures, but we've seen them struggle. But we've seen other government where people can easily follow what the government or public health officials say. So I think, to me, these are the two key points which government have shown in terms of government resilience.
Trust in government and leadership. That's definitely something that we'll be returning to during the panel discussion later. Thank you, Ambassador. Aaron, I'd love to get your thoughts on this too.
Thanks, Yvonne, and thanks to the Chandler team for the kind invite to be here. The thing that struck me about COVID-19 is its reminder to all of us of how multifaceted resilience actually is. It applies clearly to very old concepts of security, and we're seeing that play out in the war in Ukraine at the moment. But it also applies to emerging sets of issues, right? Things like public health, but also to climate change and migration and demographic shifts. And I'm just continually reminded how horizontal resilience is as a concept. It's out there, it embeds so much, and it applies to pretty much every issue that a government has to deal with and that a society has to grapple with.
Multifaceted. The breadth of it is huge and highly varied.
Yeah.
Thank you, Aaron. Kenneth, would you sum up your thoughts for this first question.
Well, thanks, Yvonne, for letting me answer last, because it means I have more time to think. So I have two interrelated observations. The first is that actually I think government resilience and community resilience is very, very intimately intertwined. I think with the exception of very, very few governments globally, there were very few governments that had the heft and the ability to respond to the crisis in its totality. So community stepping up, national resilience is also important. The second observation is that actually government resilience depends very much on how the community responds. So being able to convince a population that getting the vaccine is good for you, convincing them to have the social responsibility to wear their mask when they go outside, even when no one is watching, is absolutely critical. And I think this goes back to the idea of trust that I think the ambassador was talking about.
Right. So the community resilience that's built on trust and it kind of intertwined, right? Community resilience, national resilience, they feed on each other. Thank you, Kenneth. I want to direct my next question to Ambassador. And we know that in the last 2 decades, Rwanda has achieved considerable success in socio-economic development. You shared some examples of what the past 2 years of Rwanda was like for you. So today, could you share with us too, what were some of the homegrown solutions in Rwanda, when it comes to contributing to the nation's resilience?
Well, thank you so much. I think it's a great question. It's a good opportunity to share that. I mean, if you look at how the government of Rwanda, the people of Rwanda definitely responded to COVID-19, which is the recent, I'll say, crisis we've seen, it's impressive. So some people look at it and, I mean, we also look at it and say, well, with such a country, which is still a poor country, being able to be at 60 or 70% of vaccination, just having fewer cases, fewer deaths and so on, why would that happen? I guess, I think it's also embedded in what happened to us all along and how we've been able as a country to respond to those disasters. Because across the last 20 years, Rwanda has faced each and everything, which is kind of disaster. And every time we've been able to come up with solutions, which are not traditional, what we call the homegrown solutions. There are examples around. So one key example I will give specifically is, I'm sure many people know that in 1994, there was a genocide against the Tutsi. And this is one of the horrible planned and executed genocide. If you look at the numbers, for example, more than 1 million people were killed just in 3 months. But the particularity about the genocide against the Tutsi is that it's not someone from another country coming and killing other people in Rwanda. It's the Rwandans killing other Rwandans. There are some stories whereby you find a mother killing her children. So you imagine if there are 1 million people killed in one country, that must be killed by other 1 million, and these are Rwandans. And if you were to use, for example, the traditional justice system, you imagine how long it will take to judge 1 million people who have perpetrated the genocide, and what would you do to reconcile the people? So in Rwanda, what Rwanda did, it's a disaster itself, and then that's when you start to bring in the resilience of a country. What Rwanda did was, let's look at our history, let's look at our culture. We used to have a dispute resolution mechanism called gacaca, whereby you find the elders, the wise people in the neighbors, they will sit, they become the judge, and people will come and tell them their grievances, and they will deliver justice. That has been applied to the genocide crime with the intent, of course, to deliver justice, but also for reconciliation. The Gacaca court did impressive things. They kind of delivered millions of justices. Those people have served, and they're now back in the society. That's one example of a homegrown solution. There are many more. For example, Rwanda is the cleanest country in Africa, but what makes it clean is what we call Muganda, people coming out on Saturday, cleaning the streets. But that's not something it's just something we got from the history as well, where people would come together and help someone who is unable. We have the performance contract we call the Mihigo, that's also embedded into that. But every time those solutions, they are homegrown solutions from the culture, from history, they are brought up because we are faced as a country with an issue, with a disaster, and we believe that we can only find a solution within us, because if we were to do through the other ways, it will take ages, it will take time. And we know because we've taken a lot of time kind of killing each other or, with a delay, if we really want to develop a country, you have to find pragmatic, innovative solution. Yeah. And that kind of have built what I would call a resilience, and we'll say it's now a character as a country, whether in the government or the people. It's that we know that every issue, every problem, every disaster, first of all, we believe both on the government and also with the people, they believe that we will always find a solution and we can find it in an innovative way. So that has really, there are a number of homegrown solutions. This is what made Rwanda becoming the most improved nation in terms of human development, being able to lift out of poverty 30% of the population.
That's right.
So if you look at that history and the resilience becoming a character and the trust to the government, this is what helped really, I would say, even government to be able to weather COVID-19 despite having less and fewer resources.
Yeah, I feel like I've just had a first-hand account of resilience on the ground in Rwanda. Thank you for that description and that answer, Ambassador. I want to circle now to Aaron, because there is a saying that if we were to revitalize the core capabilities in the public sector, that could really help enhance government resilience. Now, in your role, the Ministry of Communications and Information, you oversee digital economics and digital literacy. Is there a trade-off between increasing or improving resilience while at the same time still trying to preserve the flexibility to innovate and reform? What is the sweet spot, Aaron?
Actually, I don't think there's a trade-off at all.
Oh, yeah.
I think resilience and innovation draw from the same sets of underpinning assumptions and instincts, if you like. The ability to transcend a crisis or a disaster and to bounce back better, right? That's inherent in resilience, but it's also what gives, I think, innovative drive and capacity to a system. So when I talk about the underlying instincts, really what I mean are things like an experimental mindset, the ability to try things out, to prototype, to do early beta testing, and then get data back from a system and then refine and iterate further. That, I think, is one key thing. And that is key to resilience because that's what builds up the capacity to absorb small failures in order for the system to succeed in the long term. But that's also fundamental to reform and transformation. The instinct of agility is the same. I think it applies to both notions of reform and transformation, as well as notions of innovation, because it's precisely agility that allows us to move very quickly from one domain to another. Yeah. It allows us to learn quickly, to internalize failure, and to then take the insights of that failure and move into some kind of new form of functioning. Mm-hmm. So when we think about how those different sets of instincts come together, actually you could actually say that resilience and innovation are flip sides of the same coin. They are mutually conjoined, they're twins, because they come from exactly the same sets of underpinning instincts.
Actually, that's a really interesting perspective because you always think that perhaps in ministries, governments, there may be a lot more inertia to innovate and reform, but then you point out experimental mindset is key as well as agility.
Absolutely. And that doesn't mean those things are easy to do, right? They require cultural ballast in the sense of being able to not just tolerate but celebrate the right kinds of failure. They require the right resources to be given to the work that we're doing. They need us to not optimize everything. They need us to allow for contingency capacity in a system. But when we have all those things in place, actually we will build resilience and innovative capacity at the same time.
And I think you need tenacity to get there as well, when you have all those things in place, right? Thank you, Aaron. Now, on that note, let me circle back to Maria, because as a specialist in digital governments and public innovation, how can innovation in digital systems and capabilities help strengthen and support government resilience? Maria.
Yes, I would say that the most significant contribution of technology and innovation to the resilience of government is agility. I totally agree with that. Governments can take advantage of emerging technologies such as big data, analytics, and artificial intelligence that I think is one of the most disruptive technologies currently. These technologies allows to immediately detect and understand what is happening. Also, agile and iterative and experimental methodologies help design, test, and quickly implement strategies and solutions to mitigate risks and manage the situation. Finally, the capabilities provided by these technologies, but combined with robust and quality data infrastructures, allow monitoring and evaluating of the results obtained and opportunely correcting what is necessary to achieve the proposed objectives.
Thank you, Maria. It seems like that is a resounding vote for that capability agility. I now
yes.
right? Thank you, Maria. I now want to come back to Niranjan. Estimates have shown that global government deficit can top $30 trillion by next year, 2023. With governments having to face a lot more tightened fiscal budgets, how do you think effective government financial stewardship can improve government resilience, Niranjan?
Yeah, so one of the main lessons from this COVID crisis was that governments are the main line of defense against an economic meltdown, right? So governments across the world spent to both protect public health as well as protect their economies. And we've been left with the bill right now. And as you say, it's a very substantial bill. As an economist, I worry less about the deficit, which is an annual number, as much as the stock of public debt, which has to be maintained over years. So I think that it's a very tough balancing act, because at one end, governments have to keep spending to ensure that there are no future shocks because of the continuing uncertainty in the world. At the same time, they have to ensure that they have enough fiscal firepower left for the future, especially larger shocks like climate change. So I think it's going to be a very, very difficult act, difficult balancing act to maintain. My guess is that it's going to take at least 5 to 7 years for governments to, to sort of normalize their public finances. And stable public finances are a very important part of the resilience of an economic system of a country. Another thing because I think the inequality question was mentioned, I think the world system, it's unequal in the sense that the emerging markets tend to have tighter financial requirements than the developed economies. So I think some international cooperation also is required to ensure that individual emerging markets don't go into trouble and create another round of panic. So I think while financial resilience at the level of a national economy is important, I think strengthening the international system is also going to be very important in the coming years, including reform of the IMF and all the multilateral systems.
I'm really glad you brought that up, Niranjan, because we will definitely touch on what international cooperation and partnerships can do to, raise or maybe erode that level of inequality and also promote more equity among countries. So let me get back to you on that one, Niranjan. Thank you for that. I want to come to Kenneth now, because I know that at the CIG, you are of the opinion that good governance should be built on capabilities. That's a keyword for us this evening, capabilities rather than ideology. Now, why is the focus on capabilities so crucial when it comes to building government resilience?
Well, thanks for the question. I think there's a short answer and a simple answer and a longer but more nuanced answer. Let me start with the simple one first.
Okay.
So I think the simple answer is
Bonus,
that the simple answer is that the capabilities that underpin resilience are all eminently trainable. So if you think of resilience, you think of first, preempting and anticipating what challenges could emerge. You think of developing the correct plans to deal with those contingencies. And 3, to have the systems to implement so that when the challenge does emerge, the crisis does emerge, you can actually take action. So things like these, having the foresight capabilities, scenario planning capabilities, having strong organizations and systems to support implementation, all eminently trainable. So that's a simple answer. I think the longer and more nuanced answer is that actually resilience is also about having reserve capacity that you can quickly pivot to something else. I think Aaron talked about this earlier as well. So I think this is trickier because to do this well, you probably need good and unified organizational culture across the whole of government, and you need a little bit of a shared mission and purpose. So I'll give you an example. I used to be a public servant in Singapore, and one of my last roles was in the Ministry of Sustainability and Environment. When COVID hit, we were asked very quickly, to coordinate an interagency effort to deal with safe distancing. We call it safe distancing. In most countries, it's called social distancing. And what do any of us know about safe distancing, right? If you ask us about climate, you ask about water policy, sure, I can give you an answer. But when we dug deep into, our capability, into what we can do, not just in MSE, but everywhere elsewhere, then we realized that actually we had the adjacent capabilities. So the person that was doing public comms and engagement on, say, recycling and encouraging people to clean up after themselves could also apply those same skills to safe distancing. But what really made that work, allowed that repivoting, I think, was that unified organizational culture, as well as a common sense of mission and purpose. And actually, those are also eminently trainable. Right? For example, through leadership programs and milestone programs for leaders at different stages of their careers. Yeah,
exactly.
So that's a long answer.
You mentioned, your answer brings me back to what Aaron said, that there is that horizontality, the horizontal, right, breadth of capabilities that is required. But at the same time, you also mentioned public comms. So I wanted to come back to Aaron for this one, because when you're talking about outcomes and capabilities, and again, back to your current role, how can public education, public comms skills in governments actually help strengthen or enhance government resilience?
It's absolutely critical, and it goes back to what Kenneth said earlier about community resilience being key to national resilience.
You guys
right?
have been listening to each other.
We try our best. Yeah. Because when you have community resilience, what you then have is the capabilities of the community to understand the need for measures like safe distancing or masking or what's necessary in any other kind of national emergency. But then you also have citizens who are able to influence each other, right? Who can monitor and actually help enhance the adoption of some of these measures in a much more, in a way that allows for much greater fidelity, I guess, is what I would suggest. And what this all boils down to actually is how you think about your societies. You could have your society be a large fortress, right? Very well protected, top down in its hierarchy of approaches. Or you could have your society be a web, right, that's fundamentally interconnected. And I think what public comms and good public education helps us to do is to ensure that that web is one that is strong, because spiderwebs are actually amongst the strongest material out there. But when bits of it happen to also be affected, right, or they get destroyed in a storm or in a crisis, you can reconstruct them quite quickly. Whereas something like a building, right, a large fortress, that's very brittle actually. If you rely on just a small number of people at the top having all the information, but the rest of the system doesn't have it, then one swing of a demolition boulder and the entire building can actually collapse. And what we are talking about with resilience, I think, is the strength of the web, not the strength of that fortress. Yeah. I would add just one other quick thought, if you don't mind, Yvonne. You talked about information going out to citizens. I think what's also critical for resilience is to have information coming from citizens, right? The more we can have policy making, exactly, it's a two-way dialogical process, and the more we can have citizens involved in policy making through citizen participation, deliberative democracy, call it what you want, right? The kinds of community mechanisms that the High Commissioner was talking about, that I think creates even greater resilience. And that's partly why in Singapore, we have mechanisms like the Singapore Conversations from a few years ago. We've done the Emerging Stronger Together process, which basically brings together community players, right? Citizens, businesses, other stakeholders, and allows them to have a part to play in the policy-making process and the implementation process. And when people are involved in policy-making and delivery, that I think is what creates true resilience, and it's a resilience that lasts.
Exactly. This is like this reciprocity, and it has to be like a two-way dialogue. And you also talk about collaboration, making the web a lot stronger rather than just having a brittle fortress at the top. Let me come back to Maria on this one. I do want to talk about collaborations and cooperation now, but first from a micro level, then I'll move to a macro level. And Maria, having worked in multiple government offices, we want to get your thoughts on this. How do you think the various departments, agencies can work more seamlessly together to improve government resilience? Because you often hear that when you're in government, or perhaps even other corporations, right, departments tend to work in silos. So how do you get this communication breakthrough, which makes it a lot more reciprocal? Maria?
Yes, I want to highlight two aspects that need to be improved in government to work together more seamlessly. The first one is interoperability, and the second one is data sharing. Interoperability among information systems is crucial to achieving the desired collaboration and coordination between public agencies. Interoperability allows government agencies that works, as you said, as silos, to work as one facing the citizens. However, interoperability is still a challenge for public administration. And the challenge is not technical, but cultural and legal. It is necessary to overcome the legal and the cultural barriers and a change of mind to work collaboratively. On the other hand, data sharing is critical for government resilience. Governments should build robust data infrastructures and implement governance data models. Quality data allows governments to formulate better public policies and strategies and design and deliver more timely and relevant services. There are new models to share data among public agencies like data commons, data trusts, or data marketplaces. Governments could experiment with these innovative models to share data among public agencies and the private sector.
So interoperability and data sharing. Ambassador, I'd like to get your thoughts on this as well. So from a more global perspective, what role can international cooperation and partnership between countries play in improving a country or nation's resilience?
Oh, a lot, but I'll just pick two or three. Yeah, pick the key one.
Yes.
Let's say, for example, because I'm talking in terms of reality of what you see, he kind of talked about reserve or redundancy. It's like in terms of government resilience, every government must always have the reserve resources or in each and every sector to be able to use them once something hit or comes. You know, people have been talking about cyber attack. Like if you have all the data in one place and all of a sudden you have a massive cyber attack, you must be able to find an alternative place to have it. But in terms of COVID-19, for example, you must be able to have, let's say, reserve materials and so on. For countries, the emerging countries or countries which still have to put a lot of resources in terms of economic development, having a reserve for resilience might seem a bit tricky or difficult to convince even to the people. But if you have international cooperation, some countries can actually serve as your own reserve. So you can use international cooperation and kind of have the cushion capabilities which can be tapped into when a country is faced with a disaster or something. So this is a number of the things which can be done. We've seen it in many places. We've seen during COVID-19 where countries could tap into other countries with more medical resources, for example. We can see that during this time where you have crisis of oil, gas, and so on, and countries are tapping into other people. So at this kind of, you can only do that because there is international cooperation. During COVID-19, Rwanda now has like 60%, up to 70% of vaccination. But like any other country, part of the African country, we did not have access to vaccine, or more countries went there, we couldn't jump the queue. But the country is kind of hoarded the vaccine up until to a point whereby they're about to expire. But they look at lists and say, oh, which country do you think can deliver this vaccine? They say within a week, within 2 weeks. I was say, okay, yeah, Rwanda, we can do it. But sometimes the question is about, oh, we don't have a framework whereby we can easily bring them in. So that's something which can be done through international cooperation, and it will help to kind of improve the resilience of a country. So some people talking about, some government talking about, okay, the government should be self-sufficient, create all these resources, but we are globalized, we are interconnected than we know. So that thing about reserve or redundancy, being able to create that international cooperation will be able to help that. But international cooperation can help in many other things as well, in terms of capacity, in terms of agility, in terms of sharing knowledge and so on. Countries in Africa are facing a lot of disaster, a lot of issues as well, and some of them have developed systems in place. So it's nothing wrong about kind of learning from other countries into that, but you need to have frameworks, and the frameworks can only be obtained through international cooperation. So international cooperation can really help solve a lot of problems, but specifically through creating better government resilience. But these are kind of the 2 or 3 I can pick on.
Yeah, you did pick the 2 or 3 key ones as requested. Thank you, Ambassador. I mean, it does echo Niranjan's point, right, about how international partnerships and cooperation can help promote more equity and equality between countries, between the have and have-nots. But if we were to move away from the pandemic, Niranjan, and perhaps talk about other complex challenges, we have seen the race towards net zero. It is heating up. How do you think sound macroeconomic management by governments in improving a country's resilience when it comes to responding to common challenges like climate change and meeting those energy transition goals? So what role can government resilience play here?
No, absolutely. So while the COVID shock was a very significant shock and obviously led to a lot of human pain and distress, I think what's coming is perhaps even more serious, right? So we have to prepare for this another big exogenous shock, which is climate change. And I think it's hard to believe that the climate change problem can be solved only at the level of the private sector. So governments will have to, A, provide frameworks to help the transition to the green economy, and B, also provide fiscal financial resources for this transition. And going back to what I said, that given the fact that government budgets are already under strain, how they sort of find a way through this complex situation is important. But I think it's absolutely going to be, the resilience of the government system is going to be tested again. In the context of climate change, and I completely agree with what the ambassador said again about international cooperation, I think, there's this phrase called joint but differentiated responsibilities. That is a joint challenge, but every country has a different level of development, a different time path towards net zero. So I think international cooperation is going to be even more important on the climate change front than it has been on the COVID front.
Dr. Niranjan, just very quickly, earlier on in your response to that effective financial leadership, you said governments might need about 5 to 7 years to find that perfect balance, tipping point in trying to manage those tightened fiscal budgets, right, and find that sweet spot. When it comes to managing challenges such as climate change, energy transition, and decarbonization, what's your time frame for governments to get that right?
It's a tough one. So although a lot of governments have committed to 2050 as the target for net zero, and my government, the Indian government, has said 2070 because our stage of development is different. I still feel that by 2030, 2035, a lot of the transition has to begin. You see, so whether we go to net zero at a particular date is different. But I think it's just looking at the data on climate, and I'm not a climate expert, but it is very clear that action is needed very quickly. So I think the next 10 years are going to be critical. So, and for that, again, government resilience and both administrative as well as fiscal will be important. Yeah, the next 10 years will be crucial indeed. Thank you, Niranjan. Now let's bring
our focus back to the panel topic today, Rethinking Government Resilience. And I want to conclude our panel discussion by inviting each of you to choose one, just one, out of the 26 capabilities in the 2022 Chandler Good Government Index, and tell me why you think that one capability is key for governments to consider when rethinking government resilience. Shall we have ladies first? Maria, would you like to go first?
Okay, I would choose the implementation capacity from the strong institutions pillar. The implementation capacity is about the degree to which a government can execute its own policies and meet its policies objectives. So many times, and it's very common in Latin American countries, we have sometimes we have very clear policies and very clear strategies, but the more difficult capacity or the more difficult thing is to implement those plans, those policies, those strategies. So the implementation capacity for me is crucial. And you said that we have to say only one.
Yes.
but
you have a second run. You have a runner-up. Second place.
Yes. I would say that implementation combined with data capability and coordination are crucial for government resilience.
So implementation is top, and then data capability, was it?
Yes.
The gentlemen in the studio are nodding, so we definitely were paying attention. Thank you, Maria. Just to let the rest of my speakers know that you can repeat capabilities that were chosen. Okay, so yeah. All right, let me move to Aaron next.
You know, this is like picking a favorite child, Yvonne. It's very, very difficult.
Tough, yes.
And I want to say, first of all, I'm so glad that there is this focus on capabilities in the index, because I really think it's critical. When I did my PhD, it was all about the capabilities that governments have in technology and how that actually makes a crucial difference, much more than things like structure, much more than contracting relationships, much more even than the specificity of assets that the government might own. It's really all about capabilities, whether projects end up succeeding or not. If I had to pick one, and I promise I'll pick just one, it would be long-term vision under the leadership and foresight pillar. Part of this is because I'm partial to long-term thinking. One of the best jobs I've done in the Singapore government was to set up the the Centre for Strategic Futures that's now part of the Prime Minister's office. And for me, it's important to have this long-term capability, right? Thinking about possible scenarios for the future, analyzing long-term trends, because it helps us to understand today a lot better. And for me, this is a fundamental capacity from which other things like delivery, like the ability to implement, or even things like data capabilities will emerge, because it helps us set a vision for the kind of government we want to be and the kind of society we want to serve. That normative vision, I think, is quite critical. And so for me, a lot of it boils down to long-term visioning. We need to complement that, of course, with things like execution capability and good resource allocation, because long-term vision must be tied in a very, very tight way to the process of resource allocation. But I think the fundamental priority lies in having that long-term vision.
Your end goal is super clear.
That's right. And then making sure that it's something that serves the public value of citizens.
So everyone works towards, on the same path towards your end goal. Thank you, Aaron. So we've got implementation, long-term vision. I know Ambassador is hoping I'll come to you next.
Oh, okay. I thought I was going to be the last, like Kenneth, but
Kenneth will be the last one. So Niranjan, you're next.
So for me, I'll choose helping people rise. Why? Because remember, my point when I started was that there's one important aspect we've seen in terms of resilience, specifically with COVID-19, which is people's or community trust in the leadership, trust in the community. Yeah. So you can put it part of leadership. I mean, one thing is, yes, you can have a vision, you can have goals, you have policies, and you have to implement them. That's very important. You can have best people to implement them, but the most important thing, which do really create the trust in the government, it's just the government deliver impacts, things you can see. One thing I would say which kind of created a lot of bond between the community, the Rwandans, and the government in Rwanda is that people can see impacts. The government has been able with the policies to lift out of poverty millions of people. But these are not just numbers. These are the people we see in the neighborhoods. Someone was not eating, could not even afford to eat. Now he can afford to eat and send his children to school. Just because that happens and people see that, it's not just numbers, it creates a perception that, oh, this government, these people, they are from us and they deliver for us. So tomorrow when something difficult like COVID-19 comes in and you're like, you gotta go home and you're not gonna go out, you have to put mask on from something that's like a virus that people from our country, they'll say, oh, that thing which came far away, how is it important to us? We've been having malaria and flus and so on, why is it? But to go through all of that and people being able to trust the government and say, well, because they say that it's gonna happen, you should have a track record as government to deliver, and you should have a track record to move people from one place to another place. So to me, I'll choose that helping people rise because that creates an impact and an outcome which builds on the trust, the community, which to me is important in terms, or it's key actually in terms of government resilience as you plan as a government.
Yeah, I hear you. Helping people rise, that ties back so nicely right to the very first response you gave us this evening, which is why trust in government is so important. Thank you, Ambassador. Niranjan, your key capability.
Okay, that's a very, very tough question, and I'm almost tempted to cheat and give 3-4 answers. But if I have to pick one, and I completely agree what has been said about the importance of long-term vision and of implementation. But if you're talking about resilience as the key issue, then I think adaptability is very important. And the reason is that we are living in a world of heightened uncertainty, especially with shocks like COVID or climate change. So it's basically, the zone of unknown unknowns. And in that sort of situation where we don't know what's coming, I think adaptability is very important. And if I may be allowed to cheat a bit, then you need the institutions which will foster adaptability in government and in the community.
Thank you for that, Niranjan. So we've got implementation, long-term vision, helping people rise, and adaptability. Finally, Kenneth, what is your key capability?
Thanks. I enjoy having the last word. For me, it's coordination. And this goes back to an earlier point I made about having a reserve capacity to pivot to if there is a need, if there's a crisis. So having reserve capacity doesn't mean having a whole bunch of civil servants sitting on their hands and doing nothing. That would be ineffective, inefficient, and politically untenable for most governments. But what it does mean is that we must be able to draw on different capacities and capabilities across the whole of government very quickly to address a certain crisis. And in order to do that well, you need very strong systems, structures, and processes for that to take place.
So coordination, bringing it all together.
Yes,
that was
that's
such a nice last word, right? I summed it up so nicely for you. I mean, I just want to extend my biggest thanks to all my panelists tonight. If I could just quickly summarize, we know that as the world continues to face greater turbulence and complexities such as the pandemic, climate change, and even current or rising geopolitical tensions, governments must find new ways to enhance their resilience so as to successfully navigate this current environment. So investing in public sector capabilities would therefore be key in delivering the ideal national outcomes that we talked about: growth, development, and prosperity. Those are the foundations for success. And my panelists tonight, ladies and gentlemen, have highlighted which are the core capabilities that governments must consider when rethinking future government resilience. Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you, everyone, for participating in our poll earlier. Let's take a look at the results. Ladies and gentlemen, Our panelists today have shown us that there is a strong relationship between a government's capabilities and the quality of its performance. Capabilities are key to outcomes, and the world needs to invest in developing better government capabilities. It's important that governments have a practical and relevant tool focused on capabilities to benchmark and assess their performance and identify opportunities for progress. We invite you to further explore the data and results on the CGGI website. If you would like to read an in-depth analysis of the index methodology and results, you will find the CGGI report useful. And you can find these items on the resources page on this launch site. Please do also share your thoughts on what good government means to you. Leave us a note on the Good Government page on this launch site. We would love to hear from you. Once again, we want to thank you for joining us for the 2022 global launch of the Chandler Good Government Index. We look forward to working with you to support and build more effective and trusted governance around the world. We will see you next year. Till then, take care and goodbye.